بسم الله إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. My name is Sarah Siddiqui, also known as Muslim Mamaholic. I wanted to share with you all some tips and suggestions for Ramadan, on how to make the most out of Ramadan. These are things that I either used last year myself that really worked for me, or things that am planning to do this year. But it's all advice that I give to myself first and foremost, and I just wanted to share it with you, and hopefully, inshallah, you will benefit from it as well. This talk is not really going to be about how to make the most of ibadah during the month of Ramadan. I think that there's a lot of really amazing lectures out there that talk about the fiqh issues related to Ramadan and have some really great advice on how to make the most of your ibadah. And there's people out there who are much more qualified to speak on that topic than myself. So I will refrain from including that sort of advice. Instead, I really wanted to talk about the situation that mothers go through, because that is what I can speak of from my own experience. It's really surprising to me that more people don't talk about the Iman struggles that mothers face when they become mothers. And it seems that wherever I go, whoever I talk to, we all have faced some struggle with our Iman since we've become mothers. And when you think about what happens when you become a mother, it just makes sense, you know? I mean, when you first have a baby, what's the first thing that happens? You don't pray for several weeks. So of course your Iman is going to take a hit. And then when you do resume your prayers, nothing is ever the same after that. You know, every act of ibadah that you perform, for the most part, you have an active audience. You know, there's no longer that peaceful solitude that you have prior to having children. So things are never quite the same. And, you know, for many of us, we go through large periods of time where we are not praying, where we are not fasting, several years in a row where we're not fasting, we're not participating in a lot of the usual acts of worship. And all of these things have a cumulative effect on our Iman. So I want to address some of those things. I want to talk about some of the taboo issues that I think mothers go through that a lot of people don't mention. To begin, I wanted to just make one point that some people might not want to hear and some people might not agree with, but it's something that I really feel strongly about. This is just my personal opinion, and that is putting yourself and your needs before the needs of your children. This is something that I feel really, really strongly about. This is something that I advocate a lot, and the reason being is that when you are standing on the Day of Judgment before Allah, Allah is not going to ask you about your children's salah. He's not going to ask you about your children's fast. He's not going to ask you about any deed that they've committed in their entire life, whether it be a good deed or a bad deed. He is only going to ask you about your deeds. So in your life, the most important person and the most important thing should be the state of your Iman. And that should be more important to you than your own children. I know that a lot of people are not going to like that I said that, but I will give the example of, when you are on an airplane and the flight attendant comes around and she says that, if you are surrounded by children, you need to put the oxygen mask on yourself first before you assist anybody else. Why? Because if you run out of oxygen and you die, you're not really going to be able to assist anybody else, right? If you neglect yourself and if you neglect your Iman and if you neglect your relationship with Allah, it's the same way that you will not be able to help anybody else's life on an airplane. You're not going to be able to help your children. So one thing that I want to reiterate again and again and again is you're not by neglecting yourself, you're not doing your children any favor. In fact, you are bringing harm upon them when you neglect yourself. So your priority should always be to put yourself first, to put your Iman and your relationship with Allah first, and your children second. If your children are crying and the time for Salah is passing, you need to pray. You need to put yourself first before the needs of your children, because you're going to be accountable for your deeds first and foremost. With that said, the other thing that I wanted to mention is just as a tip for Ramadan, I want your Ramadan experience to be something that's very personal for you. One of the things that I really believe strongly in is that Ramadan is a time for self-medication. It's for time for you to assess the state of your own heart and to look at the diseases within your heart and your own personal weaknesses, and to come up with a game plan or a way to improve your situation. If you do that, what you're doing is not going to look exactly like what everybody else is doing. And if you fall into this trap of comparing yourself to others, you're going to fall into the trap of not really getting to the root of your own personal ills. And then you're not really helping yourself. So do yourself a favor and don't compare yourself to others. Don't compare what you're doing with your children to what others are doing with their children. Focus, keep your head to the grindstone. Focus on your own spiritual path this month. All right, I'm going to try to go through this quickly because I don't want to take up a lot of your time. I have 7 points of things that you can do before Ramadan starts to kind of help ease and lift some of the burden that comes during the month of Ramadan. The first point being to take a minute to analyze your energy levels. One of the biggest problems that I've found amongst mothers during Ramadan is fatigue, and that directly has to do with how much energy you have. I want you to spend 2 or 3 days and really examine when you are the most fatigued. When do you have the most energy and when do you have the most fatigue? And when is that point where you feel like you're going to hit the wall, where you feel like, I just can't do this anymore? For me personally, I'm a morning person. I'm very, very active in the morning, and I can get a lot accomplished in the morning. So what I choose to do is I choose to make the most of my ibadah during morning hours, and I also choose to spend the most one-on-one interactive time with my children during the morning. I choose to give them the best part of myself. Likewise, around 3 p.m., when I'm waiting for my husband to come home from work, that's generally the time when I'm hitting the wall. And so what I plan to do during Ramadan, during that time, is stockpile some new books, some independent activities and things that the kids could do on their own. And actually, I know I'm going to get some heat for this, but I actually stockpile some new Islamic videos and educational videos, and I do let my children watch DVDs and videos and things of that nature during Ramadan, especially in the afternoon when I'm at my lowest levels of energy. Number 2, this is titled Take 5. Personally, I take 15, but as a minimum, just to get you started, I would say take 5. And by that, I mean take 5 minutes to yourself for complete and total solitude. It always surprises me that so many mothers take 0 time in the day to sit in quiet contemplation. And I think that that is so vital to a healthy heart, to having a healthy heart. And I think it's a good practice. I think it's a practice of the prophets. I think it's a practice of the Sahaba. And I definitely think it's a practice that mothers, especially who are surrounded by constant noise and chaos, it's definitely a practice that would benefit us all. During that 5 minutes, what do? You reflect on the state of your heart and you contemplate your relationship with Allah. If you want to do dhikr, do dhikr. If you want to do, like subhanallah, 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 whatever form of dhikr you want to do, that's excellent. But just take a few minutes every day by yourself in a quiet place. It's vital to a healthy heart. Number 3, buy all of your gifts ahead of time. I am a mad woman on the last 10 nights of Ramadan because I always make the mistake of buy my Eid gifts at the last minute, and worse yet, trying to stay up the night before Eid and get them all wrapped. And it absolutely ruins my Eid. Every single year I do the same thing. So this year I made it a point that I'm going to purchase all of my Ramadan and Eid gifts before the month begins and have them all wrapped and ready to go. Inshallah, inshallah. That's my goal. That's my plan. Let's see if that happens, but that's the plan. One thing that I like to do also is during Eid, I tend to give my children one gift, and I'll be honest, it tends to be a shared gift. And I tend to give them lots of little things throughout the month of Ramadan. It kind of helps build the hype throughout the month, but killing two birds with one stone, it also actually helps to keep them distracted throughout the month. So I like to spread the gifts out throughout the entire month. Number 4, hang the decorations up ahead of time. Just it's something that I think will help build the hype. Again, I have this crazy notion in my head that the night before Ramadan, I want them to go to bed, and when they wake up, surprise, it's Ramadan, the house is decorated, from top to bottom. This year I decided that we're going to do some decorations ahead of time. Hopefully it will help build the hype, build the buzz before Ramadan starts, and it will ease some of the burden of decorating during the month itself. Number 5, do a brain dump. What that means is to clear the clutter in your head. Get out a sheet of paper and a pen, write down every single thing on your to-do list that's floating around in your brain. Write down everything on your master dua list, that things that you want to ask Allah for. If you have an inbox that's overly full like mine right now at 1,500 messages, clean out all of those messages before the month of Ramadan. Why is this so important? Because when you clear your mind of clutter, you allow your mind to concentrate with full focus. So clear the clutter. Number 6, meal plan for the month. I'm not very organized when it comes to this sort of thing. I'm sure there's people out there that are much better at this and can give you a lot more tips. If you go to our Facebook page, confessionsofAmuslimmamaholic.com, or Confessions of a Muslim Momaholic, the Facebook page. There's a lot of sisters out there who have amazing ideas and suggestions. But try to do some meal planning ahead of time. I'm really trying my best to freeze as much as I can before the month gets started, so that I will spend a minimal amount of time cooking during the month itself. And number 7, which is, in my opinion, the most important, on my list anyway, the most important pre-Ramadan activity, is to sit down and have a meeting with my husband. If your children are a little bit older, or even if they're younger and you want to sit down with them and have a Ramadan planning meeting, that would be good. But basically on the agenda is what your Ramadan is going to look like. How are you going to, what your game plan is together. How are you going to handle Taraweeh prayers? Who is going to go? Are you both going to go? How are you going to manage the children? Is there any particular ibadah that you're going to be doing together? Are there things that you would like to attend? Just to give a shout out to some of the sisters. I got some really amazing ideas last year. One idea was, if your children are a little bit older, give them a rotation, and each night let one of them, or each morning let one of them take responsibility for finding an ayah in the Quran or a hadith, something that is important to them or meaningful for them, and that have them write it out on a dry erase board and kind of explain it, talk about it to the rest of the family. Another idea that a sister had is she compiles 30 hadith or ayahs from the Quran, and every night when her family sits down to have iftar, they go over one of these statements or one of these ayahs. Another idea that somebody had is, when the husband came home from work, she and her husband and the kids would make Jamaat, they would make Asr together, and then they would sit together and have a little mini 5 or 10 minute halaqah with their kids. So these are all really, really great suggestions. Sit down with your family, kind of come up together with a game plan for your family Ramadan. Kind of come up with a game plan for your family. All right, now let's get to the juicy stuff of how to make the most out of Ramadan. Last year, what I did is I sat down with a group of women, And we kind of brainstormed what are the major obstacles that we face every year during Ramadan. And there was 3 major obstacles that were mentioned. Number 1 is fatigue. I think this is something that we all dealt with. Number 2 is how to manage our kids. And I think that regardless of whether you homeschool your children or whether your children are at school, it's summertime, everybody's on summer vacation. So I think everybody's in the same boat this Ramadan. How do we keep our kids occupied? And number 3, what do we do when it's that time of the month and we are no longer fasting? And for some women, they're not fasting the entire month because of their pregnancy or because of nifas or because of breastfeeding issues. So we're going to talk a little bit about how to get the most out of the month when you're not fasting, when you're not praying, when you're not doing some of these acts of worship. All right. To begin, fatigue. We all get tired. It is exhausting. We have children. We have homes to take care of. And now we have to increase in our ibadah. How are we going to do that? Number 1, these are all things that we know that we don't necessarily always do, but we know them. So I'm just going to reiterate them. Number 1, watch what we eat. What we consume has a direct effect on our energy level. And even though I don't consider myself to be old, I am 33 years old, I am at an age where I can't do the things that I used to do when I was younger. And I have to eat healthy. And if I don't eat healthy, I will be very drowsy and very fatigued. And I will also have migraines. So it's very important to eat well. Number 2, to take multivitamins, to take a supplement, to take something to make sure that you're getting all of the nutrients that you need throughout the day. And number 3, pace yourself. One of the reasons that we experience so much fatigue is that we believe that we need to go in, hard and heavy on the very first day of Ramadan, full force. And the advice that I'm going to give you, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit more about this actually later, is to pace yourself. To start off actually much, much smaller, by taking a much smaller step than we normally take, and to gradually build that up. That's my advice. It's what I did last year. It worked really well for me, and I'm going to explain a little bit more shortly what I mean by that. All right, number 2, the children. To be quite frank, this is probably our biggest challenge during Ramadan as mothers. It is very difficult to worship Allah and to do extra acts of ibadah when we still need to do our daily grind. Our children are still eating at regular intervals. They still need to be taken care of. Diapers still need to be changed. All of the monotonous things that we do on a daily basis still need to get done. So what can we do about that? Number 1, this is something that I talked about before. Have a stash of new activities to keep them busy. Normally, I try to get by. I try to be as much of a minimalist as I can. That's a little laughable right now. I'm in the kids' playroom. It's by far is a far cry from a minimalist playroom. But I try to keep things as simple as possible, and I think that. During Ramadan, I break that rule, and I try to have as much handy as I can for the kids. I try to get as many new activities and things for them to do to keep themselves busy. One of the things that I do is last year I with a suggestion from one of the friends that I had in my homeschooling group, we each came up with 2 or 3 activities, and we made multiple copies of those activities, and we swapped those activities with other moms. So when the month of Ramadan began, I had about 6 or 7 pre-made activities ready to go for each of my kids by these other mothers, and that was such a great help. This year I decided to increase the number of mothers that were participating in this, and I invited a little bit of a larger group of mothers to my house to get together and make activities. Each one of us would be responsible for producing 1 or 2 activities in multiples for the other ladies that come. So hopefully we'll have a variety of things to do to keep our children busy for the month. The other thing that I like to do during the month of Ramadan is I try to put as many of their toys away as I can, that have small pieces. I try to minimize as much mess as I can. Um, Number two, try to get extra help. See if there's a family member that you can work out some sort of fixed, regular help with, even if it's something very small, like a small increment of time. Um, or get help just for the month of Ramadan. Get a babysitter, get a nanny, get somebody to come in, even if it's just for an hour, even if it's just for 30 minutes, somebody who can stop by, maybe a neighbor, and just kind of keep an eye on the kids for even 30 minutes a day. Um, Perhaps you would use that time for ibadah, perhaps you would use that time just to take a nap. I know a lot of people out there will say that they cannot get help, and that's understandable. However, I will say that in my experience, what I've seen is that a lot of mothers can get help. They just don't get themselves help. So I wanted to make it a point to mention that it would really be helpful for you to try to get some extra help during this month. Don't feel like that you need to do it all during this month. Number three, take naps. I know that not all mothers have the option of taking naps, but I also know that there's a lot of mothers who can take naps and who don't. So if you are one of those mothers who can take a nap, take advantage of that opportunity and take a nap. One thing that I do is when the baby sleeps, I will put on a video for the older two and I will take a nap. Most definitely during the month of Ramadan. I will make sure that I get a nap in. Number four, plan some activities for your children when they go out. If you're going to an iftar, if you're planning to take your children to the masjid for the Tarawih prayer, whether or not you should take your children to the masjid for Tarawih prayer is a different discussion. I'm not going to get into that. To each his own, to each her own. But if you're going to take your children to the masjid for Tarawih prayer, make sure that they have something to keep themselves busy and occupied if they're not going to be able to stand in prayer for the entire time. Number five, this is something that my husband and I did. Not everybody's situation is like ours, but we live in a city that we both grew up in. We both live in a city where both of our families live. And we found that the social gatherings were kind of out of control during the month of Ramadan. A couple of years ago, we counted, and let's say the month is 29 or 30 days. I don't remember how many days it was that year, but my husband and I were invited to an iftar for 26 of those days, which was just insane, and it most definitely impacted the quality of our Ramadan. So last year in our pre-Ramadan planning meeting, my husband and I came up with a cap on the number of days every week that we would go out for an iftar, and the rest of those days we would be home. And alhamdulillah, this is one of the most significant, this was one of the most significant changes that we made last year that had a really profound effect on our Ramadan experience, and it was just really amazing. So if you have a problem with getting invited to a lot of iftars or having a lot of social commitments, try to minimize that as much as you can and devote as much as you can to your ibadah. All right, the third issue that comes up, what do you do when it's that time of the month? What's interesting is, some friends and I were discussing the fact that every month when, our period comes around, when menstruation comes around, we kind of fall off the wagon, so to speak. It kind of becomes this how should I say this nicely? Like a free-for-all, where we just kind of let loose, and it really becomes difficult for us to pick ourselves back up after the days are over. And what's interesting is we go through this every single month, and yet somehow we still don't have it figured out how to keep our Iman high during this time. We still haven't quite mastered that yet. But just some tips and just some ideas of things that you can do to take advantage of the time. When you are in a place where you're not praying or you're in a place where you're not fasting, one of the things that or probably the biggest thing that comes out of fasting, or the biggest thing that comes out of prayer, is that it is a constant reminder of Allah. Prayer is a fixed reminder at different intervals of the day, um, forcing you to remember Allah. Fasting is something that throughout the day, regardless of what time it is, you're constantly remembering Allah. So there's other things that you can do to kind of remember Allah, um, even though you're not able to fast and even though you're not able to pray. One idea is to do something at the start of every salah time that forces you to remember Allah, even if it's not salah. So that could be something like at the beginning of Dhuhr time, you make it a point to sit down and to do some sort of dhikr, or you make it a point to make dua, but something to kind of remind you of Allah, of your connection with Allah, at a fixed interval throughout the day. Something that you could try to increase during this time is the listening of lectures, listening to Quran. Something that I like to do, I tried this out last year and I really liked it, is to increase in alternative acts of ibadah. Things that you couldn't necessarily do throughout the rest of the month that are special things that you can do during this month. Like, for example, doing certain acts of kindness towards other mothers, helping alleviate some of their burden to make their load a little lighter, perhaps preparing meals for them, perhaps preparing meals for your family members, cooking for your parents, something along those lines. Taking on a new dawah project. I know a lot of people like to do some sort of treat that they give to the neighbors, where they write a note to their neighbors. And they, maybe make them some cookies or something like that. This week might be a good week for you to undertake one of those kinds of dawah projects with your kids. This also might be a good time for you to get outside. Ramadan is falling in summertime this year. It's going to be very hot. And chances are likely we're going to spend as much time as we can indoors, since we can't drink water. And the time that you are unable to pray and the time that you are unable to fast might be a good time for you to get out, take your kids out as much as possible. They might be going a little bit stir crazy. So try to think of things that you normally couldn't do if you were fasting, and utilize this time to do those things. That being said, I'm looking at the time and I'm about 28 minutes. I wanted to I have just a few extra tips and pointers of how to make the most of Ramadan. I'm going to try to zip through this as quickly as possible. Try to make it a point to improve the actions that you are already doing, while at the same time increasing in new deeds. And what I mean by that is, I give this example of somebody who's filthy, somebody who's dirty, they're unclean, and they're trying to put new clothes on top of their dirty body. What they really need to do is take a bath. They need to clean what is already existing before they put something new on top to adorn themselves. Likewise, if you are in a state where what you are doing, there's not a lot of quality in those things that you're doing. Perhaps your prayers are deficient. Perhaps you're not praying at all. I think my advice to you, first and foremost, is to take some time and to work on those things, those basic fundamentals, before you start adding all of these other things on top. And just a side note, I'm going to talk for a minute about people who, if you are in a situation where you're not praying. I know that people have a lot of things to say for those who are not praying. And I'm not here to give you advice as far as, whether or not your fasting counts if you're not, completing all your first salah. I will just say this. If you are in a place where you are at a rock bottom and you need to build yourself back up, building yourself back up is going to happen one brick at a time. It's not going to be something that happens all at once. And if you attempt to build yourself back up all at once, chances are very likely you are not going to be successful. You're going to fail. So my advice to you is to take it slow. And yes, it's Ramadan and we want to make the most of every moment, but your Iman is not just about this Ramadan. And if you're in a situation where you're not praying, this Ramadan is irrelevant to you. You need to get back on the path of praying. So my advice to you is to begin with one prayer. And if that means that you are fasting and you are praying once, so be it. Begin with one prayer and have a marked interval of when you are going to increase by adding on another prayer. Whether it be, you add on one additional prayer every week. Perhaps you want to go a little bit faster because it is Ramadan. So, every 3 days you add another prayer. You add an additional prayer. But begin with one and add on to that. One of the things that I think happens during Ramadan is people make the mistake of aiming too high. They're in a place where they never read Quran, they never touch the Quran, and all of the Ramadan prep advice out there is this is how much you need to read in order to finish the entire Quran during the month. And the bottom line is some of us might not be in a place where we have the ability to finish the Quran in 1 month. Chances are, if you're at a place where you're not reading Quran at all, you have no relationship with the Quran, chances are, if you finish the entire Quran in 1 month, you're going to burn out. You're not going to complete that goal. So you need to be realistic to what your situation is. And you need to start off small, and you need to incrementally improve and increase as the month goes on. Again, like we said this before, that your path is going to look different than everybody else's path. Don't do what everybody else is doing. Figure out what it is that you need to do. Figure out what the state of where your heart is, and make your own action plan. Make your own game plan. Okay, the next thing that I'm going to tell you is above and beyond the best, put 10 asterisks next to it, put 10 stars next to it, the best piece of advice that I've ever received, the best thing that I did last Ramadan, and it has had a profound effect on me since last Ramadan, and that is do the ibadah that you love to do. Everybody is different. Everybody enjoys doing different things. Some people, they love prayer. Some people, they love to read Quran. Some people love to give in sadaqah. Some people love to do dawah. Some people love to seek knowledge. Some people love to sit in the company of their parents and be kind to them and be dutiful to them. Everybody loves to do different things. So instead of fighting, yourself, do what it is that you love to do. This religion is something that is beautiful, and the goal of this religion is not to do all of these actions. The goal of this religion is to become a better person. So do the things that you love to do, because those are the things that are going to impact you in the most profound way. There's a story of Ibn Masud where Ibn Masud, as many of you know, he was famous for his knowledge of the Quran. And he was kind of like one of the authorities of the Quran. And the people came to him and asked him why he was not fasting. They were, wondering why he was not fasting some, nafil fast. And he said that he did not fast because it interfered with his recitation of the Quran, and that was something that he loved to do. So the lesson that I learned from that is that not everybody is going to perform every act of ibadah to the greatest extent. Not everybody is going to excel at everything. So pick and choose what you love and excel in those things, because it will have a domino effect into other areas, into other acts of ibadah. much time do I have? Okay, there's a lot more left, but I'm just going to mention a couple of things that I think are important. Number one, well, no, not number one, but be realistic in your expectations of your children. This month is not about your children, especially if your children are not at that age where they're accountable. This month is about you. It's about your Iman. So as much as we try to teach our children to love Islam, to teach our children to love Ramadan, this month is first and foremost about you. So don't compromise your ibadah, don't compromise your worship in the name of doing things for your children. Some of you had asked me to give some advice about addictions, like caffeine addictions and things like that. Just really briefly, there's a lot of really good articles that you can read online about addictions, but basically the main thing that you need to know is anytime that you're fighting an addiction, every addiction gives something to us. It does something to us. It pleasures us in some way. And the only way to find an addiction is to replace that addiction with something else that will also produce the same effect. So, for example, let's say I am addicted to my monthly cup of tea. There's a couple of things there's something that I'm getting out of that cup of tea. Either it's bringing me an energy boost, and that's something that I'm going to have to find a replacement for. I'm going to have to find something else that will give me that sort of energy. Or, like in my case, it doesn't really give me energy, but it's psychologically calming. So in that situation, in that instance, I would have to find something else that also calms me psychologically and gives me that soothing effect. So if you have an addiction that you're trying to fight during this Ramadan, find something else to replace it with that is a healthy addiction that also produces that same pleasure or whatever it is that you seek from the unhealthy addiction. The last couple of points, give up multitasking. I read this really amazing article about how the Prophet ﷺ was not a multitasker, which is kind of, taboo in today's time. Multitasking is kind of glorified, but actually, you can do a lot more and have a lot more quality in the things that you do when you do them one at a time. And the Prophet ﷺ would only do things one at a time, and he would give each thing and each person his full attention. So do the best you can to minimize multitasking and focus on one specific task at a time. And the very last thing I want to leave you with is give yourself permission to cut corners. I mentioned before that you don't have to be a culinary master in the kitchen during this month. We have such high standards that we set for ourselves for this month, and I want you to give yourself permission to kind of slack off a little bit. If you don't normally do this, give yourself permission to buy a little bit more packaged food. Give yourself permission to eat out a little bit or order in. Give yourself permission to have your kids wear their clothes one more time before you wash them. I know people think that that's so disgusting that I just said that, but we live in a time where we have really, really high expectations on ourselves, and this is a time to prioritize your relationship with Allah and cut yourself some slack. You cannot be expected to do everything 100% all the time. So if you're going to sacrifice something, sacrifice some of the things that are not as important. And with that said, there's some other things on here that I didn't quite get to, but I've already spoken for quite a long time. So inshallah, what I'm going to do is when I type up these notes and I post them on the blog, you will read some additional points as well. But that is all I pretty much had for you today. I hope that you benefited from it. Feel free to leave more comments, more suggestions and tips in the comments. And that's it. I hope you benefited. Jazakallah khair. Please make dua for me. Any benefit that came from this is from Allah. Any mistakes are from myself and from shaitan. All right. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.